mix what I like, what I like.
I mix what I like is exactly where you want and need to be. I mix what I like organic, vegan, soul food from your immediate diet. Get healthy.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
You have to understand that you have to be quiet for people. If you're down to struggle, you're down to win. If you're down to struggle, then goddamn you don't deserve to win. Let me listen to you if you're willing to fight for it.
I said these politicians clowns, so let me reiterate it. Just being libs will never get us liberated. They killed the Panthers and the left got obliterated. Left us charged on whites and racist whites reinvigorated. Fed shot Fred and birthed more jiggers by targeting the scholars and marketing the dealers. Hey, their in-game got us marveling our killers. Support the empire, not toppling the pillars. The stats show we only care about our figures. That ain't a threat, that's just a stat hole, nigga. Hey, that ain't a threat, that's just a stat quo, nigga. They weaponize our stars, it's just a fact. Four ninjas over there, billionaire to distract poor niggas. Put a few of us in there to attract more niggas. Hey, they give them inclusion at our expense. They milking our chocolate, we think we rich. They give us some chips so we can brag. Hey, why they own the potatoes and keep the bag. Ay, now you stacking your Pringles and I ain't mad. Ay, gotta sell that black soul for why these cash.
We're not a racist organization because we understand that the racism is just it's a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people. And we're gonna have to put it back in the hands.
My paper chasing past to have me feeling like a hypocrite. The dollars can't compromise the change I'm trying to implement. I use the mic to keep Decepticons at bay with the same qualms as Noam Chomsky and Kwame Ture, hood socialists with a new era beret. It's like they neuralize you. We just redo errors. It's crazy. They got new Elijahs Xing out black messiahs today, trying to neutralize us. Just throwing away. Hey, loyalty, it's rarely immune to pay. These coons come buffoon for the Klansmen that they obey. They discard us, disregard us, we take them back anyway. We easy prey, it's evident by the precedents that we lay. Well adjusted to injustice, our people in disarray. Feel the terror from mega ever scared to go disobey. We recite the words, they Shakespeare in the play. They Othello the ghetto, then go play us to get their way. I'ma go ham, let the Claudius come my way. Yeah, I'm humble, but sometimes my haughtiness has a say. Yeah, they wanna keep us down, they don't really want more for us. They been shut us out, they won't open these doors for us.
The educational program, that's very important. As a matter of fact, we used to put us that a person has to go through 6 weeks of our political education before he can consider himself a member of the party, able to even run down ideology for the party. Why? Because if they don't have the education, then they know where. They were saying, if they're not educated, they want more, and before you know it, they'll be capitalists, and before you know it, we have Negro imperialism.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
Yes, indeed. What's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here on Black Liberation Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball, very happy to be your host. Please do like, share, subscribe, support the platform, particularly via our Patreon. The link is in the show description. That was, oh man, and who sent that to me? Did the artist send that to me themselves? I think the artist sent that to me themselves. In fact, they did. So I just want to shout out again. That was the Stat Quo, Comrade Trav. Let me go ahead and hit that subscribe button and support that work. Appreciate that. In fact, they hit me up and said that the song was in part inspired by the work we do around here. So I definitely appreciate that. And greetings, everybody. Greetings to the remixers. Welcome, everybody who's able to join us live. To those who are going to see and hear this later, welcome and peace to you as well. Yeah, let's fix these problems. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that that Patreon in the show description. Brother Jamil in the building. Wa alaikum salam. Got a big show, got a number of things to get to, and then at 9 o'clock, our guest is going to join us to have a discussion around Togo, Pan Africanism, and as I alerted her, given a little bit of looking into her work, Farida Nabourema, if we get to it, we definitely disagree on the role Bitcoin can play in African liberation. But shout out to her. We'll see her in an hour or so. And shout out to Dwayne Wong, who put us in touch. And I look forward to it. But in the interim, a number of things I did want to start off with. Big shout out. Oh, I see what up on Instagram. Panama Hav in the building. What's good? What's happening, my man? Yeah, let's so yeah, there are a couple things. So we started with that track from Comrade Trav. Big shout out to him, and I have to run that back more routinely. That joint was kind of nice. And but I did want to so obviously we saw the big pop-up show from Kendrick Lamar, and there were a couple of things that I noticed, and one from a legend in underground hip-hop radio, who has obviously evolved into being a much bigger deal, and someone I've had some back and forth with, attempted to build with a little bit. We'll see if it works out one day. And a fellow traveler in these black ambiguous streets, who famously had a run-in. I don't know if any of you will remember this from back in the day on MSNBC, but he had somewhat of a famous run-in on that. But I did watch his video, and I'm talking about Jay Smooth, who for some of us, you know, legendary. The Underground Railroad on WBAI, Pacifica Radio in New York, was, even for those of us outside of the New York area, was legendary radio for the hip hop community. And someone whose takes on pop culture I've appreciated, and this one I do as well. So I did want us to watch a little bit of this, and I think the link is already in the show description. Just a little bit of this here.
Y'all know I had mixed feelings about this beef in general, and I did have some issues with this concert that we'll get to, but man, listen, I don't know how you watch Kendrick's pop-out event last night and don't come away with a feeling of pride about this hip-hop thing of ours, and how we can bring us together in the most beautiful ways for the absolute pettiest of reasons. One of my favorite paradoxes in music, and especially hip-hop, has always been how the music can speak to our souls and create these moments that have almost nothing to do with what the lyrics are saying. I've always said I think Anti-Up by MOP is the most joyous, life-affirming song I've ever heard, even as the lyrics are about punching people in the face and robbing them. And Last Night to me was the same thing. I can't think of when I've ever seen a more joyful.
Know nothing about that.
I did want to, so I wanted to just play that part right there, because the shout out to the MOP track Anti-Up, we are on the exact same page on that one right there. That was bars to me. So I wanted to start with that, but I really just wanted to skip. He has a number of interesting things to say about what Kendrick did, the role he played, his connection, how Drake took a big L. That was his reference to the Petty piece. And one of the reasons that, as he points out, that Drake took an L in this battle is that he just didn't he didn't properly understand the relationship Kendrick has to hip hop and to the black community, and which I fully agree with, and will defer to other experts on that for that point. And this picture here is very dope, by the way. But this was the part I thought was of interest that I actually noticed myself. I was wondering to what extent it was gonna take hold, but there's two things that he says, one in particular that I just wanted to shout out real quick, or to acknowledge.
His people and his commitment to making sure his art is about something bigger than himself. And even with the surrealism of running back this ruthlessly festive diss track 5 times in a row, what we got in the end was a beautiful and quintessentially hip-hop night in Los Angeles. Even though I didn't think it was a perfect night for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'm sorry, but I just don't understand why rapping over vocal tracks is considered acceptable nowadays. This might be the line in the sand where I have to make peace with being washed, but I just don't think rapping over vocal tracks sounds good. And I hope people took notes on the impact of Kendrick's set where he wasn't doing that, and some of the opening acts that fell back on that. But more important.
So that was one.
Now listen.
That's a bar. Shout out to my man Marcel P. Black. Real rappers don't rap over vocals. And shout out to Jay Smooth for acknowledging that Kendrick did not do that and others did. And I think it is a major problem. So I just wanted an old head moment myself. I agree with that. But this is even, here we go.
Importantly, I just wouldn't feel right if I ignored the layers of meaning that come with having Dr. Dre on stage for the climax of that show. And look, I totally get what that represented with everything Dr. Dre stands for in hip hop history and LA hip hop. I get how big it was to have him be the one to introduce Not Like Us, but I just can't pretend I don't remember the other history that Dr. Dre was bringing with him to that stage. And much as I've seen a lot of people come out of this beef holding Kendrick up as this unambiguously heroic defender of women, having the well-documented abuser of women, Dr. Dre, up on that stage just complicates that narrative. And actually, right when I was finishing this video, one of my all-time favorite LA rappers, Open Mike Eagle, posted his reactions to the concert, and I think he spoke really well to this Dr. Dre elephant in the room.
Part of the whole narrative with Kendrick and Drake has been that Kendrick is trying to expose Drake for being an abuser on a lot of different levels. And I think that bringing out Dr. Dre, at the very least, it muddies that. You can never take away the stuff like the achievements that Dr. Dre has had. But Dr. Dre beat the hell out of a woman in public. She was a music video show host. I used to watch her show when I was little. There was a show called Pump It Up, hosted by D Barnes.
All right. So you can watch the rest of the Jay Smooth, who links to Eagles video. You can watch all of that. I did want, just as a reminder, I went to her channel and I just thought, just as a quick reminder, not that those folks around here need it, but just as a quick reminder.
Till then, doctors have ordered Robinson to do nothing but get complete rest and try to eat as hearty as he can. In Los Angeles, D. Barnes, host of the Fox TV rap show Pump It Up, is filing a civil suit against Dr. Dre of the hardcore rap group NWA. Barnes seeks damages over $10 million and claims that last January at an LA club, Dre assaulted her, grabbing her hair, slamming her face and body into a wall, and kicking her in the ribs. Barnes' attorneys say that Dre was apparently upset that one of Barnes' producers inserted her interview with ex-NWA member Ice Cube into a Pump It Up show last winter featuring NWA. The group and Ice Cube have become mortal enemies since he left NWA 2 years ago. NWA's independent publicist, Norman Winter, says, quote, "I know Dr. Dre as a gentle soul, the loving father of a baby boy. I can't imagine him treating any lady in anything but a gentlemanly fashion." No comment from NWA's record label, but here's what NWA themselves had to say about the incident back in March.
That's what she get. I hope she get it again. She got beat down. The person, the host of that show, did something that she knows what she did and got beat down, and I hope it happened again. See you around, buddy boy.
What was that, Ren?
Huh?
What did she do that would that?
What did she do?
What did she do that created the situation that made it that bad?
Try to make us look stupid. Tried to play us.
Is that national TV?
Tried to play us.
On national TV.
Tried to play us in front of millions of people. It's not over yet.
D. Barnes' lawyers say they're obtaining a restraining order against Dre, who they claim has continued to threaten Barnes, and that their civil suit charges him with assault and battery, inflicting emotional distress, and defamation. In another rap incident,
First of all, remember MTV News? I used to watch that all the time. Tabitha Soren, I think, was her name, and Kurt Loder, and what was the brother they got rid of at the beginning? Something Jimmy Jackson, something like that. So okay, so I did notice that, and that was the first thing. And to be perfectly honest, at this point, it has evolved to the point where wherever I hear Dre, the first thing I think of is D Barnes, and then not long after that is the not that they're to be equated, but the hypocrisy that Cube and others called out once upon a time, from going from the shiny suit era to the thug, from the Just Say No era to the Chronic era to the Apple and Beats and Jimmy Iovine era and all of that. But yeah, so I thought that was and something, there's a sort of foreshadow, something I'm gonna get to before our guest shows up at 9 o'clock. The other contradiction I think with the Kendrick thing is that if you're making use of, as you should in a beef, of Drake's mixed background, I'm just fascinated by the what that says, or if it says anything, or should it say anything about his Kendrick's choice in spouse, and what does that mean in terms of how he views her, or how others should view her. And I just would like, I think just selfishly, I would like the African world to reach a collective no, I'm just playing, conclusion on the one drop rule. The rules keep changing anyway. But yeah, I thought that was wild. So I shout out to Jay Smooth and others for picking up that point and mentioning it, even as there was pleasure, I think, to be enjoyed in the pettiness of it. The last piece I wanted to raise on this, and I haven't found much details on this, so I would be happy to be updated on this, is the relationship Kendrick has to Amazon. Because I think that the other thing that I noted in all of this is that as there was this, and is this tendency to want to take a victory lap with the celebration over Drake's demise, or Kendrick's rise or return, or the moment in hip hop, or the bringing the Bloods and Crips together, and the LA victory that they pointed out after suffering that city so much, they deserve some victory. I've seen all of that kind of discussion. What I've also been reminded of is that this is still yet again being brought to us by, sponsored by, allowed by, benefiting by, enriching by, and so on and so on. So yeah, I don't know to what extent it was all sponsored by Amazon, or to what extent, but it just was, why is this Amazon's thing? And we're still in that. And it's even worse, really, if I think about it, because Amazon, to the extent it's going to replace the pre-existing music industry or engage in music, it is itself a much bigger conglomerate, by the way, whose biggest revenue source is still its relationship as a data service provider with the State Department and the intelligence community. So all the packages and the Kendrick concerts and the Bezos to the moon news and all of that kind of stuff still, I think, often sidetracks the fact that Amazon, that brought us this latest hip hop victory, is also a primary player in State Department, state surveillance, and so on and worse. So I don't know, but yeah, has Dre ever apologized? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't keep up with everything. I just was thinking that, so I'll go back. We'll have to continue that. But yeah, has Dre ever spoken on this? Has he even offered any kind of an apology? No. Okay. Yeah, I didn't think so. All right. I didn't say it was all about that. I just said all right, whatever. All right. Y'all don't do jokes in the chat, man. Y'all don't. The subtext of the beef, you are knowing that, right? You do know that, right? A normal PhD. You do know that, right? The subtext of the beef as it's being played out in these streets, in these internet streets, has a lot to do with that. So I don't, but I was just making a, I mean, all right. Yeah, a lot of people think Kendrick is the savior and have been wanting Drake's demise. I'm not mad at Drake. I mean, I'm not defending Drake. No, Tim Dog passed away. For real? Is this new? Am I late to this? Is this breaking news? Oh, wow. Leftists don't like jokes. That's why all the best comedians are just liberals. The real left doesn't have like an actual comedic voice, apparently. All right, okay, but I don't want to, let me not get bogged down because just let's so we mentioned this. I think this came up on EYL. I think we did it over there a little bit, but I did catch, I didn't really get a chance to until after the fact to get into this grassroots thinking article on from community movement builders on Roc Nation's lobbying efforts and JayZ's association with the GOP's top funders. So we talked a little bit about, so this is from a couple weeks ago, but members of the American Federation of Teachers, of which I am now one, the Pennsylvania chapter rallied in front of Pennsylvania State Capitol to oppose Senate Bill 757's controversial school voucher program pass Pennsylvania Award for Student Success. So sort of one of the quick through lines or parallels or themes that I wanted to run with just with this connection here is that with whatever progressivism or positivity that we're enjoying, myself included, from Kendrick's victory lap, it is important, I think, to remember the role pop culture, celebrity, and artists are meant and allowed to play. So even with Kendrick doing what he's doing, remember, he still is the Cash App spokesperson, the intermediary from the hood to white business, literally played out in that commercial. He is still indirectly playing or forced to play some sort of propagandistic narrative domineering role for Amazon. And similarly, JayZ and many others are willfully to varying degrees, whatever, forced to varying degrees, whatever, playing a very similar role economically, politically, etc. And here in terms of education. So, and as we mentioned the other day on EYL, it's just, I think that's where it was. I'm sure that's where it was. This is just part of a privatization effort to further manage how education, the educational process in this country, and to assure that corporate interests are aligned and dominant. And this Fonz Wolf, I really got to do a full discussion on this book, Selling Free Enterprise. I have really been enjoying it. It's a few decades old at this point, but the history of selling free enterprise, a lot of it was, this is an update of a lot of what she writes about in that book, that one of the things the corporate world did, starting particularly after the Second World War, was really involve itself both in the factory spaces, employment spaces, but also in schools and entire communities, and using schools as they are as centerpieces for communities to distribute a corporate factory employer dominant logic onto a populace and to undermine unions, labor movements, and more. But the truth is more straightforward, as they say here. Conservative activists engaged JayZ vis-a-vis Roc Nation to lead a multi-million-dollar lobbying campaign with website, social media, and petition aimed at defunding Pennsylvania's public schools and resisting court-mandated funding reform of Pennsylvania's public schools. Rock Nation is offering poor Philadelphians a free meal to dine and learn in exchange for their signatures. And it's not lost on me that Left Forum conference I was just at Brooklyn's Long Island University campus had a huge, the imprint of Rock Nation was huge. Apparently they funded a good amount of music related programming over there, and their imprint was big. So Jeffrey Yaz, founder of Susquehanna International Holdings, is a self-described libertarian worth an estimated $27 billion and is reportedly the largest single donor in the 2024 election cycle so far. So this is that's it. So JayZ's working with Yaz. Kendrick, wittingly or not, is working with Bezos. Few of us are fully detached from supporting any of these entities, but I just thought. And actually, let me go out of order here, because speaking of Bezos, this was something else that was just sent to me, and I thought we would take a look at, because I thought it was fascinating. And I even tried to at least start a dive, didn't get too deep with it. But yeah, sometimes it's willingly. I think sometimes it's unwittingly. Sometimes I think it's even innocently and naively. Sometimes I think it's unconsciously. Sometimes I think, as you point out, it's just overtly, aggressively greedy. It's hard to assess, but we can always judge the act itself or the decisions themselves. We don't always have to delve into to the intent of the person, the intent of the initial messaging for sure, but the intent of the individual caught up in it, I don't know. But so this wasn't the same person. But remember during the pandemic when, and I keep referring to the version that I read about, that there was this black puzzle maker who was being touted as and being sort of praised as someone whose business was taking off during the pandemic because everyone's being encouraged to support Black-owned businesses, so on and so on and so forth. And one of the criticisms that I had was, well, what are the real potentials of that, given what that would take to actually scale up, blah, 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 blah. So when someone sent me this story, I thought, wow, this is... So I don't pretend to know much about the specifics on this. I'm very much interested to learn more. I tried to look into it a little bit and only got so far, but let's take a look at this here and see what you want.
Bezos has stolen over $100,000 from me. And it's a small business that is insurmountable. Like, I can't come back from that. So now I have to file for bankruptcy. I have to bankrupt my business, a business I started over 3 years ago, during COVID, when the world was at its roughest. I was so proud to be able to create something, and now I have to shut it down. So what happened? Well, I created a board game. It's called DisparityTrap. It's a social justice board game. It's basically like, like the board games we grew up on. Your goal is to go around the board, accrue wealth by hitting all these milestones, like getting a job or going to college, starting a business. The whole goal is that you are doing that in someone else's shoes by playing an identity different from yours that you live in. So it's putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It's living in someone else's perspective. And each of those milestones are based off real life statistics, real life research. So it's a very educational board game. It's to teach you about the inequities in our society. And in a very ironic fate, I am living through the statistics of my own board game, and I'm realizing that as I say it out loud right now. That's crazy. That is crazy. So I created this board game with my own money, 100% of my own money. I saved up money during COVID. I invested that money into stocks. Grateful for the stocks that I happened to invest into, and I earned enough money that I felt confident to take that money out and invest into myself immediately. Over $20,000 of that money I spent in creating this board game, in terms of just like ideation of like putting it all together, play testing it, getting friends and family to all play it multiple times. All those people who've done this, thank you so much. You know who you are. And I launched a Kickstarter. And to launch that Kickstarter, I made a commercial. I spent $11,000 on that commercial. I wrote it, I directed it, I produced it. I had friends in it, but I paid everybody their union rates. If you know what I mean, you know what I mean. And I made this commercial. And then I put the commercial on Kickstarter, and I launched the Kickstarter, and it was funded in 5 days. And then I started doing pre-orders, and then I sold over 10,000 copies of this board game. And years into all of this, Amazon just takes it. They just take it. How do they take it? One day I go online. I'm using, just to clarify to people who don't understand, I put my board game with Amazon fulfillment centers. There's a whole program they have for small businesses where you could take your hard copy products that you created and put them in their facilities around the country, so that when people purchase it on your personal website, you can basically automate it so it sends it to their fulfillment center, and their fulfillment center ships it to those customers. And so it gets there really quickly. That sounded amazing to me. It was very affordable for a small business. So I did it. But then I sold and I was selling. Amazon was like, we're going to charge you more. So I started charging me more money. They were charging me thousands of dollars a month to keep my inventory there. It went from hundreds to thousands of dollars to keep my inventory there. So I was like, I got to get my inventory out. So I started moving it out. But what they didn't tell me so clearly, they put it really into small places that it's going to cost me 3 times more to get it out than it cost me to get it in per unit. Actually, 10 times more. It cost me a couple $100s to get my units there, but it cost me $10,000 to get a portion of it out. And by the time I could stop it, I had to pay still that $9,000. So I paid it. I went to debt on credit cards to pay that. I paid it. It wasn't good enough for Amazon. So they now, when I started moving it, I had to pay it. And then I was like, I have this other inventory. I don't want to work with Amazon anymore. I'm going to liquidate it. So that basically means I take that inventory and I give it to third-party sellers at a discount rate, and they could sell it their own way. And I make a little bit of money on that product. I lose out because I don't make the full price value of it, but I don't have to lose out by like having it sit on shelves, so to speak. I did that. So now Amazon owes me about $16,000, $17,000 because I'm using the whole system. Like Amazon's connecting us, me and the other third parties, because they have my products. And they get a portion of that. And my portion totals $16-something thousand. They already got their portion. And mine, after all of that, Amazon got their portion. After all of that, mine's $16-something thousand. And Amazon still doesn't want to give me that. They hold it off. They immediately flag somehow, not immediately, but right when the money was starting to be owed, like months later, when the money's starting to be owed, because you have to wait a couple months for this whole process. Once the money was starting to be owed, they put a hold on my account. They deactivated my account. Then they say my account has been is suspected of fraudulent, criminal, illegal activity that's harmful to the customers. Don't know what that means. I made this product myself. I manufactured this myself with a manufacturer in China. Obviously, I didn't make this myself. In China. I paid for it to come to the United States. I did all the legal regulation. I made it all get here. I did the trademarking, all of it. So who's fraud? Who? Not one customer chargeback or complaint on my Amazon account. But they say they flag it. I go through the whole process. The whole process. It took 4 more months. And they don't get back to any of my emails for those 4 months. They're just like, submit information, submit information. I submit the information. I submit my paperwork, my insurance, all this stuff. They wait. They come back. They're like, they just have a standard message saying, we're going to maintain that you have been doing fraudulent activity. Doesn't tell me what exactly that activity is this whole time. Not one specific example of what I've done, just a standard template statement. I keep following, I keep sending emails. I send dozens and dozens and dozens of emails, no replies from anyone that used to reply back to me back when I was in their good graces, I guess. But now, nothing from them. They just go dead silent. Then I finally get a message saying that they're going to go through a verification process. I go through the verification process. I don't see anyone on the screen. I just hear this voice of this Eastern European person talking to me. Don't even know if they're from the United States. Don't even know where they're from. They're just talking to me. I do all the things. I show my passport. I show all the things. They say, okay, we'll let you know in a few days what the result is. I get back a same template email. After review, we have made a final decision that you've been acting in fraudulent activity, and you are not going to get your inventory over 2,600 units, and you're not getting your $17,000. Basically, flat out, they're keeping all of it. And now that's over $100,000 worth of inventory. Thanks, Jeff Bezos.
So, yeah. In terms of, I mean, off the top, there were a couple things that are obvious problems that sort of speak to the broader problem that I'm at least, I mean, obviously, individually, I'm sorry to hear about all that. I think, yeah, I think individually that's terrible. And to the extent that all of that is accurately reported and explained, it just sounds a mess. But this is again why, you know, one of the many reasons that I've argued that not that we shouldn't support Black-owned business, but we have to look carefully at what it means to be a Black-owned business and to what extent Black-owned businesses can support actual liberation or the improvement of a collective. So at least 2 quick problems were, of course, the fact that the shipping and the management of all of that had to run through Amazon, that the individual small businesses, which many Black-owned businesses are not in the sectors of the economy like manufacturing, which, as my other point is, that, as he pointed out, is taking place in China, and or well, certainly defense and you know, surveillance industries and all of that, but also in, as is the case with all businesses, is at this point with Amazon being a monopoly, such a dominant force that is in this space, that shipping, the management of all of that is controlled by someone else. So I tried to look into this a little bit. I couldn't find anything on this specific incident or issue beyond what was said here. And but I just tried to look into a little bit of the history of this problem and Amazon's relationship to small businesses. And obviously it's not a good one. This story from 2022 in a more perfect union, in a typical Ponzi scheme, a company promises investors exceptional returns. The returns aren't paid with profit from business activities, but with money from newer investors. In this version, Amazon promises small business owners and prospective entrepreneurs a path towards economic independence, only to quickly find that Amazon uses its power to pit small firms against each other, enticing or forcing firms to spend more and more money with the company. In Amazon's scheme, the only one getting paid is the firm at the top, and that's Amazon. So in 2021, So the short of it is that Amazon, through that fulfillment process that the brother was talking about, invites small businesses to do just that, to say, we'll handle the movement of your inventory for a fee. And then depending on how much you pay, with increasing fees and to what extent you are into advanced levels of this partnership program, they will give primacy to your or one or another product. So this article goes into, and several others that I was looking at just kind of go into the basics of what I think most of us understand, that if you can manage search results, page displays, and Amazon has increasingly done that, and Bezos signed off on this himself directly, apparently, that is wedding the search results to how much businesses pay into Amazon's program, that you're not getting, you're not getting the best product necessarily, the highest quality or the best one suited for you. You're getting the one that has paid the most for promoting. So it's pay for play, just like it is, by the way, with artist promotion, something I and others have been talking about for decades. So the whole Kendrick Amazon thing is perfect. It's irrelevant how much we like Kendrick or how talented he is. He is promoted through a pay for play relationship with the record industry and in Amazon at this point, as is the case with the products you would find when you search for Amazon. So if you're increasingly having to pay for search result placement and then having to pay for an increased price for the delivery of your product through Amazon, where this story says Amazon is getting up to 60% of each sale, you see. But anyway, so in 2021, Amazon.com accounted for more than half of all American e-commerce sales. Although the consumer may not know it, the company was merely a facilitator for 60% of those transactions. So even in its dominant place, it's just facilitating. It's just playing an intermediary role and taking a big cut for it. For goods sold through the Amazon marketplace, Amazon does not own the inventory or pay for the storage costs of a product. It connects a buyer to a seller and charges a fee for the service. In 2021, Amazon facilitated $390 billion worth of third-party transactions. That's 3 times the value it processed in 2018 and more than double what eBay and Walmart.com processed during that same time, according to Marketplace Pulse. Nearly 50% of Americans, this seemed odd to me, but I did, nearly 50% of Americans pay the $139 annual fee to join Amazon Prime. Is that not a misprint? Is that actually meant to be taken literally, that nearly half of the American citizenry is paying for Amazon Prime? It should absolutely be nationalized and the wealth redistributed. Workers paid more, given more vacation, more salary, less hours, more healthcare benefits. I mean, we should, wouldn't it feel better to know that when you're shopping on Amazon, you're actually helping labor and business, because Bezos has been cut out of the profit consideration? From a seller's point of view, the structure of Prime essentially requires them to spend an ever-increasing amount of money on Amazon services, most notably fulfillment and advertising. Today, if a new seller wants access to Prime customers, the only option is to pay Amazon for fulfillment services. Amazon owns the expected facilities, like the 500 plus delivery stations that small third-party delivery partners use to load up the day's packages, and the unexpected. Amazon controls 20 airport hubs that shuttle merchandise overnight to distant geographies across America. Amazon's distribution network is nearly 5 times the combined size of rivals Walmart and Target. Amazon fulfillment business, whatever fees can quickly deplete any profit. One houseware brand pays 55% of each sale to Amazon. This part, the long story short about this part here, the TDLR, whatever of this right here, is advertising dominates the business side. So the marketing, the psychological warfare, the branding, the symbolism, the information warfare involved dominates because they compare advertising to the scorpion that kills the frog of the business side. So the business side is worried about the quality of the product, the customer experience, and the advertising side is saying, now we just want the money. And that's why Bezos personally signed off on the decision to allow for money to the pay-for-play process I just described to determine whose products are known and shipped and advertised and promoted. It's all right. Got a few more minutes left. One more. So I'm happy to look into that some more, learn more about that. But that's again why I make, as I'll go to now, this argument around. Oh, there were two more things I wanted to get to, but around buying power and the ineffectiveness ultimately of business to change meaningfully the lives of most anyone for that matter, but particularly Black people. And you can see why it would be a psychological warfare technique, because get everybody to get Black people to focus on liberation through business, and then look where it ends up. Even when you start to do well, you are hamstrung by either the lack of venture capital investment, the lack of infrastructure, or the lack of an ability to reach your customer base. All right, so this story came up in my Google alert for Buying Power feed. Black-owned business in Valdosta, Georgia, are underrepresented. Here's how to help. Despite Black Georgians having a spending power of $118 billion, Black business owners see only about 2% of Georgia's business revenue.
I'm Larry Hogan. As governor,
no, we can't.
I promise to uphold Maryland law.
We can't listen to that. Larry Hogan's people text me all the time. I don't know how someone thinks, with my 202 DC area code exchange on my phone and my complete absence of a voting record for even Democrats, much less Republicans, why Larry Hogan's team thinks that I, as a Maryland voter, would want to hear from him. But here we go.
Business revenue in the state. Black-owned businesses only see about 2%.
Some of the challenges that I run into is lack of funds.
I'm Malia Thomas, your neighborhood reporter here in Valdosta, and speaking with some of our local Black-owned businesses about why they need your support.
I just like being here in Valdosta.
This is Lucilla Griffin. She's a lifelong neighbor of Valdosta, having had her own cleaning business since 2001. Despite the challenges, she tells me owning her own business has given her the life she's always wanted.
My grandson got something going on at school. I can, see him, do what I need to do for him, whatever. It's flexibility and financial stability. I love it.
Lucilla is one of
but again, the cyber element of the messaging around Black business is that the only way to get, or that you should deserve even time to take care of your grandchildren or to relax or to be, is to own. Again, somehow the messaging has to be redirected to, we are all producing the wealth that is being accumulated by a handful of people. We should all benefit from it, whether we are the owner or the consumer. That relationship should not be seen with such the level of imbalance that it is. And this is just another subtle way, I think, in which that occurs, particularly when targeting Black audiences. This idea that she has to own a business to have time off to spend with her grandchildren or the material resources to do it is ridiculous.
One of the 5.1% of Black private business owners in the state. Despite Valdosta's own population being 54% Black, our Black business population here has similar numbers. One of the reasons for that is what Lucilla and South Georgia Black Chamber Operations VP Marion Ramsey says is Black-owned businesses tend to only get approved for 1% of loans within the first year of operations, compared to 7% of non-minority businesses. That's why our region, South Georgia Black Chamber, is focused on getting financial help for those who qualify. Lucilla tells me the best way to make do without that capital, though, support fellow Valdostans.
You find somebody that's doing a good job in what they're supposed to be doing, you need to support them. So that's the way I feel about it.
Despite Black Georgians having over $118 billion of our state's spending power, they still only see about 2% of that revenue shared. In Valdosta, I'm Malia Thomas, reporting.
So again, the focus is, I think, inappropriate. It shouldn't be on who has what spending power. It should be on who has what amount of the wealth produced by that exchange. So what percentage of the wealth produced in Georgia goes to Black people or Georgia residents at all? And what percentage of that wealth produced is accumulated into the hands of a handful of people? That should be the focus. An incessant focus on the business ownership and the buying power component is missing the point. And I think that's done by design. I think, especially with the work I'm doing this summer, I will, if it hasn't been proven already, I will be, able to contribute a little more to that evidence and that pile of proof that this is being done by design, specifically to walk Black people away from radical organization, which is our only actual power. But to the extent we're constantly being denied even recognizing that and being told our power lies elsewhere, we don't have it. All right. One more before our guest gets here. Something I've been looking at myself here and there. This story came out the other day in Black Writers Week, or Black Writers Week from RogerEbert.com. Which I think is great, because the great ally that Ebert was. Do folks remember when he was at the BET Awards with his Black wife, and he was put on the spot and asked like a Black pop cultural question? He passed, if I remember correctly, he passed. But anyway, Blackout, the disappearance, by the way, speaking of which, so Roger Ebert, the movie critic, famous movie critic, with his Black wife, and doing this on his platform, obviously not by him, by Reginald Ponder, is a discussion about the disappearance of Black couples in advertising. Have you been watching TV at all these days? If you have, odds are that you have seen fewer and fewer Black couples living and enjoying life together in commercials. Seeing a Black man and Black woman together is almost as rare as a UFO, Bigfoot, or unicorn sighting. There are many explanations for this phenomenon, but whatever the reasons, this disappearing act by advertisers sends the wrong message to Black couples. Where is the love for Black love? It appears as if the Black couple has been replaced by an interracial couple, racially ambiguous couple, or just eliminated, making them all but invisible. Just in writing this article, I was bombarded with the commercials that featured interracial couples from the likes of Pizza Hut, Sleep Number, Jimmy Dean, and pharmaceutical companies whose products I can't pretend to pronounce. While my observations are anecdotal, they are not a mirage. Pepper Miller, author of Let Me Explain Black Again, wrote about this phenomenon in a 2017 article about how mixed race couples have become the new norm. I did find that article. I didn't find it compelling because it was itself more or less anecdotal. So not that it wasn't wrong, not that it was wrong, but anyway, Deborah Block wrote about the new normal in her 2021 Voice of America article. The Americans see more interracial relationships in advertising, citing that it is good business. Melanie Schreffler, editor of marketing to the Emerging Majorities, when speaking about the growth of minorities, commented that marketers aren't turning out multicultural ads for the good of society. They recognize there is money involved. If you skip out on a group that is going to be half of the population by 2042, good heavens, who are you marketing to? This concept holds for the growing interracial couple segment. I think that's interesting. I don't have any evidence for this, so I'm speaking largely anecdotally too. But I do think that it is more than just trying to prepare a marketing relationship with a population that isn't even dominant yet. and the way they're describing who this half the population is going to be, that is, are they saying that they're not, I don't think that they mean to say that so-called mixed or biracial people will be the majority by, or half of the population, that is, by 2042. I think that it's related to the white community becoming a minority by that time. So multicultural, I guess they just mean any non-white group will be half of the population, but that doesn't speak to the specifics of interracial relationships or their offspring, if that makes sense. In other words, having Asians and Latinos in a multicultural society does not speak specifically to descendants of interracial relationships, specifically between Black and white partners. So my point being that I think this has as much to do with this prevailing underlying anti-Blackness. I do see it that way, that the idea of a Black couple is not interesting to white people, whether advertising or in a society itself. So if there is recognition among whites, which there already is globally, that they are a minority, why not prefer or privilege or symbolically project an increased clear preference for an interracial, lighter-skinned, biracial version of the Blackness that is so undesirable? So that's to the point being that this one reference person is saying advertising is aspirational. It is who we want to be. That's where I felt like they're speaking more to my point, even if in a different way. Aspirational beyond just class or material interest, but aspirational in the context of even an unconscious preference among whites that the Blackness they deal with be of a lighter shade and involve at least one white parent. Then they look at the Pew Research numbers and conclude very quickly that what these numbers also say is that 76% of Black men who marry get married to Black women, and 88% of Black women who marry get married to a Black man. So most Black people marry other Black people. So the idea that there's this wild uptick in interracial relationships, particularly Black-white, because those numbers aren't even accounting for how many of these Black people do marry non-Black, but also non-white partners, it's just not routine. So then, of course, it concludes by destroying all of its credibility by concluding that this is all important because, as the Selig Center tells us, Black buying power is going to be 1.6 trillion or 9% of the nation's total buying power, which, by the way, is a point I made in my own work, that even if you accept that this number is real, it's still only, well, when I've published, it was 8%, but it's only 8 or 9%. It's not even the percentage of the Black population, and the percentage of the Black population is not even represented. So what level of power is that? What level of economic clout to be energized is there? Which is sort of my point. So yeah. Okay, we can stop. I think that basically covers the point. But yeah, so if the Instagram thing is working, I think it ends in an hour, so I'm gonna say goodbye to the IG folks and invite them over to the YouTube channel, and link in the in the bio there. And to everybody else, please do like, share, subscribe, support the platform in any way you think you can. No, we didn't, and I did not know that. I don't think anybody that I was looking at was mentioning that. I didn't, so that's interesting. I wanted to make a Kyrie joke, but I didn't come up with one fast enough. Somewhere there's a Kyrie Irving, Kendrick Lamar joke that I didn't get there. I don't know. I'm not sure what that's supposed to be. My bad. So let me double check to make sure that, because I know she said she had a pretty hefty deadline. I mean, you know, like a definitive end that she had to hit. So let me just double check that she's but yeah, so endeavoring obviously to extend the conversations as we do about the Pan-African world, and to address in his and most appropriate way some of the concerns raised around, do we talk too much about Palestine, enough about the continent? I was very happy that Dwayne Wong put us in touch with our next guest. So let's take a very quick break and get to that conversation. Don't go anywhere. Back in a minute with more.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I mix what I like right here on Black Liberation Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Please do like, share, subscribe, support our Patreon in the show description. However you can support the platform, please do. Big shout out to Dwayne Wong, who as I've invited and do with most everyone we talk to, if there are other people, other topics you think we should build with or engage, please put us in touch. He absolutely stepped up and did so, and related to his own interest in the specific history and politics of Togo. He put us in touch with our next guest, who I'm very much looking forward to speaking with. Her name is Farida Nabourema, who, among many other things, is a social activist and writer, recently emerging as the unequivocal voice of Togo's pro-democracy movement. Farida has been a fearless advocate for democracy and human rights in Togo since she was a teenager. Through over 400 articles written on her blog and other sites, Farida denounces corruption, dictatorship, promotes a form of progressive Pan-Africanism, and promotes a progressive form of promotes a form of progressive Pan-Africanism. In 2014, Farida published a book in French titled La Pression de Oppression, The Pressure of Oppression, in which she discussed the different forms of oppression that people face throughout Africa and highlighted the need for youth and women to be politically engaged. You can find the link to her work in the show description to learn more, and we welcome Farida to the platform. Good morning, or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. Greetings.
Good afternoon here. Hi. Thanks for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining me and us. And again, shout out to Dwayne for putting us in touch. If I may, you know, I watched a number of your videos trying to somewhat prepare for today, and I actually meant to play a quick little video in advance, but since I've already messed that up, we'll just keep going. So forgive me. But I noticed in one of the videos that you made a point in fact, in your TED talk of some years ago, that interviewers often want to only hear of the suffering you and your family have endured. Our focus here on this platform is often activism, its definition, application, and the pathways of organizing to get there. So can we begin with a sort of activist history of Togo and the history that you are an extension of?
Absolutely, and thank you for being mindful of that. I really appreciate that thoughtfulness. So my country, Togo, is located in West Africa, for those who can situate it, right next to Ghana. And the reality is that we and the people of Ghana, Benin, and Nigeria, we are technically the same in the terms of the various ethnic groups that compose our nations. So it was literally the same group of people living together before the colonial era. And after colonialization, Togo was given to Germany as a colony. It was, and then eventually, after Germany lost World War I, it was given to the French and the British for a specific reason, because the French and the British were fighting over having more influence in West Africa. and neither of them wanted to let go of the German colonies in West Africa, which were Cameroon and Togo. So they decided that the two of them were going to keep those two countries, and the other remaining colonies of Germany were splitted among the French and the British. So Togo eventually, the British side of Togo, which is by land size the 1/3 of the area of Togo, eventually joined the Gold Coast to form modern day Ghana. So when they were fighting for their independence from the British colonial empire, the people in that area were asked if they wanted to remain independent under a British colony or join Gold Coast and become independent, and they chose independence. That was 1957, and in 1958, the people of Togo also sought a referendum organized by the United Nations and voted for independence on April 27, 1958. So the French colonized part of Togo is what is known today as Togo. But my country, Togo, has been through a lot of turmoil at the hands of colonialism, and unfortunately, that continues still today. We have a very peculiar history. First of all, let me add that the vast majority of people who were enslaved in the Americas actually came from the coast, the coastal part of West Africa, the vast majority, that was referred to as the slave coast. And that coastal part of West Africa goes all the way from Nigeria all the way to Ghana. So the part of Togo and Benin, Ghana, Nigeria were concentrations where the vast majority, millions of slaves were removed from. So a group of former slaves in Brazil, after obtaining their freedom, decided to go back to the continent, and they returned to the coast of slave, and they established themselves on that coastline from Nigeria all the way to Ghana. And part of those Brazilian returnees who settled on the coast of Togo, eventually, some of them involved themselves as well in the slave trade because they realized how much of a big business it was in the Americas. So they got involved in the slave trade, and others were more politically against slave trade because they have suffered from it and they had moral issues against it. But the interesting thing about that specific group is that they came back as being the only ones that received Western education. So they knew to some extent the Western way of lives, and they understand how things happen in the West. And their children ended up being the first elite of those regions, and specifically for the case of Togo. And they started the independence movement in my country, Togo. Of course, they were not the direct victims of colonization in Togo because they came back as an elite force. They acquired a lot of land, and they were very rich families, but then they understood that the system of oppression was continuing in Africa, and they wanted an end to that. As part of this group, there was this guy called Silvanus Olympio, who, because the vast majority of these people who returned from Brazil, they carried their master's names from Brazil, which are Portuguese names. So you have family names like Olympio, da Silveira, de Medeiros, de Souza, de Almeida, which are still present in our coast today. Silvanus Olympio, who was highly educated at the time, who studied both in the British part of Togo, then the French part of Togo, and studied also under the German part of Togo, was very fluent in multiple languages. Then he went to the UK and got his degree at the London School of Economics, then continued his graduate studies in Austria, then eventually got a Juris Doctorate from American University in Washington, D.C. At the time, he was one of the most educated presidents in Africa. He spoke 6 European languages fluently, in addition to speaking 3 Togolese languages fluently. Silvanus Olympio was the director of Unilever in Africa, but he quit his job to focus entirely on the resistance against French colonialism and seeking the independence of Togo. After quitting his job and with his plans pretty open about wanting to run for office at the time, the French devised a method to kind of like prevent him from being able to do that. At the time, all the colonies in Africa that's where under French colonial rule, had the right to send some representative to the French parliament because our countries were considered as being departments of France. So Togo had the right to send one person. And in 1946, when they established that system where colonies could now send a representative to the French parliament, the independencies won. And when the independencies won in Togo, they made it clear at the French parliament that the aspiration of the people of Togo is not to be part of France, but to be an independent nation. So for the following election, that's where to happen 5 years later in 1951, Olympio leaving his job to run for that position because now they have increased the seats to 2, was prevented. And the French used a law that was established during colonialism to justify his arrest. So it is quite mind-blowing the way that the history is pretty intertwined. So during World War II, the Germans subjected France to something very special during the occupation. They took possession of the French central bank, and the Germans were issuing the French currency. And they were deciding on the monetary policies of French, how much currency could be emitted, and so on and so forth. So the French decided at the end of World War II in 1945, when the Bretton Woods institutions were going to be set up in 1946, they needed to have more economic power because France was literally extremely broke after World War II. So they built a new currency. At the time, we used to use the same currency as the people of France. But then they built a new currency called the CFA currency, Franc des Colonies Françaises d'Afrique, which means the franc of French colonies in Africa. And franc in French means money, technically. And that currency was set up in 1946, requiring that all the nations that were colonized by France in Africa have their gold reserves in the Bank of France. Why? Because France needed gold to have small weight. At the time, the US has the biggest gold reserve, but the French, wanting to play a role as a global power, needed to also have more gold. So they took the gold of all these colonies and made it their own to increase their power. Then they also established a law that the citizens of those countries could only carry CFA currencies unless they have a special permit authorization from the French administration. As a result, owning any other currency but the CFA was illegal for citizens in those countries. So Olympio, having worked for a British company at the time, was paid in British pounds. And his bank account was in the Gold Coast, which became modern day Ghana. So he issued a check to his architect to help him design a house he wanted to build to stay in Togo. And the check was at the bank in Ghana. And the French seized the check and they arrested him for illegal possession of a foreign currency. And they sentenced him to 2 years in prison for that. And as a result, he lost all his power, all his rights. He could neither vote or run for office in Togo ever again. So by doing that, the French assumed they will get rid of him completely. But that did not work. Of course, the people of Togo were determined for their freedom. He managed to work along with other independence activists and leaders from the north all the way to the south, because the level of cruelty of the French administration at the time was extremely appalling. And also, when Togo was placed under the French mandate after World War I, they had 3 categories of colonies. They have what they call Category A, Category B, Category C. Category A nations were supposed to obtain their independence within 20 years. The Category B nations were supposed to obtain their independence within 35 years, and the Category C nations were supposed to obtain their independence between 40 to 50 years. Togo was in Category B. So the people of Togo said, you know, you took over in 1919, it is 1950s, you have overstayed your welcome. Based on the UN documents, we are supposed to obtain our independence. So what are you waiting for? So that independence struggle led the French to devise some very cruel tactics to prevent the independentist leaders from attaining success. They sent multiple ones to prison for many years. They banned the children of independence activists to go to school and to access healthcare, simply because they said those were the benefits of colonialism. So whoever is opposed to colonialism is not going to benefit from the colonialism. One of those activists happens to be my grandfather. In the process, my grandmother actually lost 8 of her children because she was not allowed to go to the maternity. And whenever she gets pregnant, she loses her babies. And eventually she had 2 of them who developed rubella. They were denied care simply because her husband is an anti-colonial activist and they were not allowed to continue going to the hospital. My father and his siblings were also removed from school because schools were considered as benefits of colonialism. But the reason why people like my grandfather, who came from the northern part of the country, who are considered as the poorest and the most illiterate communities of the country, the reason why they were interested with independence was because they were the ones that were suffering the most from the colonialism. They were used to farm and work in mines and building roads and infrastructure for the French, literally for free. It was slavery, but then because slavery was officially banned internationally, the official term for it was forced labor. But when you are forced to work and you don't get paid and your hands are chopped because you don't provide the needs, you are actually a slave. And the specific factor that led my grandfather into joining the independence movement was pretty interesting. So the French increased taxes in their colonies during World War II. And the amount of taxes they increased was so heavy that it was almost impossible for the farmers to meet their goal. They had to provide them up to half of their crops every year, when these farmers were already suffering to sustain their families with the yield that they got. So my grandfather and his brother owed payment to the French colony, and the local traditional rulers at the French literally when they came, they removed all the existing kings and appointed their own traditional kings. And those puppets that they appointed were the one ensuring that the taxes are paid. And of course, they also get a cut out of it. So they tied my grandfather and his brother to a tree like an animal. And from people who came from the northern parts of the country, who are very heavily influenced by, who have a culture of herdsmen, tying a human being to a tree is literally the most denigrating form of treatment. It's like equating them to a cow or a goat or an animal. So they were left there on the tree for several days. And eventually a teacher who came from the southern part of the country, the coastal part of the country, and was working in the local school in the village, witnessed the situation, and he got really upset. And he protested against it. And at the time, the teachers were seen as the intellectuals, so they were a little feared. So the traditional ruler released my grandfather. And my grandfather went to him to thank him for his gesture. And he was actually surprised because the French has always opposed the Southerners to the Northerners by making them believe that we treat the Southerners very well because they are more educated, they are more better looking, they are more polished. And then the Northerners were seen as the animals, the savages, the barbarians, to some extent. So he was not expecting such act of kindness from that man. But then he went to the man to thank him, and the man said, "The only way for you to thank me is to send your children to me for school." And my grandfather said that no, he's not sending his children to school because he doesn't want his children to acquire the bad manners and the wickedness of the Europeans. And he doesn't see any values they can teach his children there. But the man told him, I'm the teacher in the school. So if you think that I have the values to defend you, then you should be able to entrust me with your children. And my grandfather said, well, I will think about it. Then eventually he went back and said, among my kids, there is one of them who is sick all the time, who is completely useless on the farm, who is extremely lazy. I'm going to give you that particular one because if he's a lost case, I don't think he was going to be useful to his life, to us anyway. So he's going to be that one you can take. And then if I see some improvements in his life, then maybe I can send the other ones. And that particular kid happened to be my father. And my father started going to school in that process. And my dad mentioned that when he started school, the very first day he was going, the entire community gathered and they were crying, begging my grandfather to not let him go. Because at the time, they saw schools as being the worst form of punishment. Going to the white man's school was the worst thing that could happen to you. And they were pleading that he changes his mind, but my grandfather insisted he goes. But every day he returned from school, my grandfather would sit down and call his brothers and his friends and ask him to teach them exactly whatever he was taught at school. So eventually it became an alphabetization program because my dad was teaching them the alphabet, he was teaching them the words, he was teaching them to read, and that eventually grew. But long story short, the teacher in particular became my grandfather's best friend. And he had a stroke in the village. When he had a stroke, my grandfather accompanied him back to the capital city where they had the best hospital. And he stayed with this man for almost 8 months, caring for him in the capital city at the time. And unfortunately, the man died. It was while in the city caring for this man that he actually heard about the independence resistance that the people in the South were leading. And then he went back to the North and told them, everything they told us about those in the South is completely false. These people, we are one people, and we need to fight to get rid of these white people. And that's how my grandfather became an independence activist himself, and eventually spent years in prison, in and out, until Togo received its independence. So that is the story behind my family's particular journey into activism. But going back to the general movement itself, Sylvanus Olympio eventually managed to secure the independence of Togo in 1958. And that independence was secured thanks to the high spirit of Pan Africanism. Why? Because in 1956, the French organized another elections. The elections were every 5 years. And when the people of Togo were demanding their independence, they had this specific idea of creating what they call an autonomous nation. So they say that you guys will not get your independence, but we'll make you autonomous, which means we'll give you a few ministerial positions. Of course, not the important ones. We're just going to give you some basic ministerial positions, and then you'll have a prime minister, but then you still are under French rule. So when they organized elections, they literally prevented the independencies from accessing the polls by refusing to giving them voter card. And they won, and they went to the UN and said the people of Togo chose autonomy, they don't want independence. But the Olympio movement decided to find someone who could speak up for them at the United Nations. So they went to the president of Liberia, which at the time was the only Black nation on the continent that was free because Liberia was not colonized. And that president went to the UN and made a plea by saying that the election.
Oh no.
The French were not true. That was.
Uh-oh. So you're breaking up there just a little bit. Yeah, sorry, you broke up there just a little bit. I do now. But
all right. Okay. So the president of Liberia made a plea for the UN to conduct an investigation into those elections that the French organized in Togo. And the Togolese activists at the time insisted that the investigation must be conducted must be headed by an independent Black nation. And they chose at the time the ambassador of Haiti at the United Nations. His name was Max Dawsonville. He was sent to Togo to conduct an investigation, and he found out that the French actually sabotaged the elections and the people of Togo wanted independence. They did not want autonomy. So the UN now conducted new elections on April 27, 1958. It was a referendum in which the people of Togo had to choose between staying a colony of France or becoming independent. And by 97%, they voted for independence. And that is how Togo attained its independence. Now, when Togo attained its independence by voting majoritarily for its independence, the French did the same thing to Togo that they literally did to Haiti, but I will say in a different way. So they mentioned that they invested money in building infrastructure. They built roads, they built schools, they built hospitals. I mean, in the entire nation, they built less than 10 schools, but they still wanted to be paid back for it. So they built absolutely everything they say they spent on Togo and require that we refund them everything before we attain our independence. So Olympio, becoming prime minister then, decided that he was going to sacrifice 60% of Togo's budget in the first 2 years of independence to refund the French. And he increased taxes, which was very difficult for the people, but he managed to raise the money within 2 years. He paid back the France every single penny. And then on April 27, 1960, Togo was independent and we didn't owe the French a single dime. Then his next move was to introduce a bill at the parliament to remove Togo from the CFA currency because it's like, we're now independent. There is no reason for you to continue holding goals, for you to decide on our monetary policies and how much money we can print and what we can order or not. So 2 years later, the Parliament of Togo passed a bill on December 12, 1962, to create the Togolese franc and remove Togo from the CFA currency system. Exactly 1 month later, in the night of January 13, 1963, soldiers from the French colonial army were sent to Olympio's house and they assassinated him. And that was the beginning of the dictatorship that has been ruling Togo for the past almost 60 years, because those soldiers eventually took over, were imposed to Togo as leaders. Independent Togo didn't have an army. The French built the army from scratch from their colonial soldiers, whose only goal was to maintain Togo under French control. And those soldiers have been ruling Togo ever since. Eyademanya Simbe, who was the head of the gang that killed Olympio, became president and ruled for 38 years. And when he died, his son, supported by the French government, again also did a coup and took over and has now been ruling Togo for almost 20 years.
Thank you for that very concise breakdown. And I was looking for a joke that said, and now everything's been good ever since, but clearly we didn't even get to that part. And you've been a leader in a movement to remove the current dictator, who is dressing himself up as a Pan-African. Dwayne put me onto that a couple weeks ago. I see you've been talking about that for at least a few months in videos I've been watching just this year alone. So could we talk a little bit about there were a number of things I wanted. So I'll just squeeze it in now. So I'm assuming that one of our disagreements around Bitcoin is your critique of the rise of and the role of the CFA and the franc in colonialism and currency and colonialism. So my only question for you on that would be, because I know we don't have time to get into it, I don't want to take up too much time, is as I said in our chat, my broad-based simplified concerns with cryptocurrency or any currency as being part of a liberation effort is it doesn't in and of itself address both accumulation and distribution. So I don't see how poor people go from poverty to overturning their relationship to broader, in fact, global economies through a currency. So I'm happy to have you say whatever you'd like about that, but I do want to spend and have you spend as much more time of the time we have remaining talking about how the current dictator is deploying Pan-Africanism in an attempt to protect himself, and how that is playing out, in fact. So feel free to let's address either of those as much as you like. Yeah.
I'm going to quickly talk about why I am very vocal about using Bitcoin. I'm first of all going to start with the practicality aspect of it. When you are an activist in a country like Togo, the worst thing that the government does to you is to completely shut you down financially. Activists in my country were banned from even having a bank account for decades. Whenever they open one, the government will seize their funds and completely shut it down. We have people who are in prison in Togo today who have been in prison for the past 6 years because during our last uprising in 2017-18, they donated money to the movement and it was tracked back to them. And they were arrested for funding what the government considered as terrorism. And in addition to that, political parties, movements that are against the regime, their bank account gets shut down and their funds get confiscated and the people donating to them get arrested. So initially using Bitcoin was a matter of avoiding, circumventing surveillance and censorship, because we need money to be able to sustain ourselves in the movement. For example, we have a protest coming up on Sunday, and for that protest, we need funds to be able to provide buses for people in different remote parts of the country to be able to join the rally ground, because people are too poor to be able to spend like $10 on a round trip just to go and protest on one day. We need money to provide security. We need money to provide healthcare, because usually those protests are repressed and people get wounded and they need treatment, and so on and so forth. But then when the government shuts down any other means for you to be able to access funds, the practicality of Bitcoin is that it allows you to circumvent that and to keep the privacy while doing that, because they won't be able to track who specifically sent this specific amount of money to this person. So that is the practical side of it. Now
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I just ask quickly, are the payments you're talking about being necessary for this protest being conducted in Bitcoin? You're paying people for the services in Bitcoin?
Not all of them, but for many of them, yes. At least the payments going from my movement to the protest is actually going in Bitcoin. We are not sending cash. Sending cash is the best way to get arrested, because literally you have only a few avenues to send cash. You can either do Western Union, because the protests are funded mostly by the diaspora. And when you do that, when you go to the bank, then they can track specifically and then they arrest you. And then they also know who sent the money. So when they come back home, they get arrested. Some people got back home from the diaspora, and because they donated money, they were arrested from the airport because they came back home on vacation. So the security aspect is really important, and the practical aspect is really important. But now I'm going to talk a little bit about why even Bitcoin as a current, in its conception, is something that I defend far more than using our currencies. When you live in a nation like the United States, or you live in European countries, you may not actually have any need or interest in having Bitcoin, because to some extent, you have a bit of rule of law and you have functioning institutions. But when you live in a dictatorship where your money and your policies are entirely controlled by a few. And in the specific case of Togo, our money is entirely printed and controlled by the French government. And with the policies that the Bretton Woods institutions have established, they have literally forced the vast majority of our nations into severe debt. The consequence is that our currencies depreciate continuously. Since the creation of the CFA, for example, it has lost more than 200% of its value. But that is the case of the countries that are under the CFA. Even nations that are not under the CFA currency, such as Nigeria or such as Ghana, over the past 2 years, their currencies have lost more than 80% of its value. There was a point where I was living in Ghana and I could see firsthand how bad that was for the average Ghanaian, who lost 80% of the value of his currency, when the vast majority of products that they consume on the market are actually imported, and they are imported in dollars. As a result, your cost of life actually doubles or triples when your salary actually has lost more than half of its worth. This is a direct, the depreciation of the currency is a direct devaluation of your labor. And that is the specific reason why our people cannot build wealth. Because no matter how much you save every year, you are losing 30, 40, 50, 70% out of the money that you have saved. In the past 1 year alone, the currency of Nigeria, the Naira, has lost 76% of its value. That of Ghana has lost 40% of its value. That of Sierra Leone has lost 60% of its value. And that of Egypt has lost more than 40% of its value. So people are losing the tiny bit of money that they make out of no fault of theirs at all. And they have no other way to bypass that. And I do understand that Bitcoin is volatile, but the reality is that when you compare the volatility of Bitcoin to the volatility of our own currencies, it is still better to have Bitcoin than to have our currencies. So somebody who has a stable currency like the dollar or the euro or the German currencies may not have to worry about volatility. They care about inflation, and look at the way people are struggling in the West and complaining because of 8-10% inflation. The average inflation rate in West Africa today is 37%. And in addition to that, the average depreciation rate of our currencies is 40%. So you lose 40% of the money that you are paid when your cost of life has increased by 30%. So in the end, your quality of life depreciates considerably. A teacher who was paid 1,000 cedis in Ghana in January 2022, by December 2022, That's 1,000 cedis, which was worth at the time $200 in January, was now worth $60 in December. And that teacher still has the same cost of life. Actually, he has to pay more. And the worst part is, whenever our currencies depreciate and our governments are unable to pay back their loans, well, we are required to reduce government expenditure and increase government revenue. And how do they do that? They increase taxes. They increase taxes on the citizens and they reduce social services. So you even get far less from your government than you used to. Hospitals can no longer function because their budget has been sized down. Schools can no longer function because their budget has been sized down. You have to spend more to acquire the basic needs, while at the same time, you are paying more taxes, but then at the same time, your currency has depreciated, which means you have less, and you have inflation, which means things are expensive. The conditions, the economic conditions that our people are subjected to because of the neoliberal economic model imposed to us since the creation of the Bretton Woods institution is nothing other than exploitation and slavery.
But Bitcoin is the most neoliberal, the most reactionary response to that. It is the most, it is created by libertarians. It is the Peter Thiels and the Winklevosses who own it. They wanted all of this because they don't want any government oversight. They don't want anybody to be able to acknowledge or recognize what it is they're doing or how they're doing. And ultimately what they really want is more investment in a product that is useless, but whose value is based on more investment. So that's why there's so much promotion in places throughout the continent. So just quickly, everything you're talking about as a problem is not solved by new currencies. So especially a currency that is like Bitcoin, has 60% of its supply held in 0.01% of Bitcoin wallets. It is the Winklevosses and the Peter Thiels who own all of the Bitcoin and who only make money when people are invited to invest in the exchanges they control, which are banks, and the distribution of the Bitcoin, which they control and only has value when other people invest in it. So all the things that you're talking about in terms of the cost, because you're right, the cost of the cost of living, all of that is managed to make sure that our lives are not changed in any meaningful way, but people are not poor because of the value of a currency. They're poor because of the policies that lead to the maldistribution of the wealth that's created. So I just don't see how Bitcoin solves all of the things you're talking about in terms of tax distribution, paying for healthcare, education, food, goods and services. Bitcoin doesn't solve that problem. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I actually can literally name out of my head right now multiple reasons in which Bitcoin does solve a lot of those problems, and it does solve a lot of problems because it solved it for me and it solved it for my people, but it's a conversation that I actually think we should have a whole show about.
Yes, I would love to do that. And I'm sorry to have to, I just wanted to put that on the table. So yes, I'm sorry. Please, I'll stop there. Go ahead and
yes,
we'll continue. We'll schedule another time to talk just about that.
That'll be great. That'll be great. So I think the focus now is the regime in Togo portraying itself as a Pan-African regime. So over the past 10 years, something phenomenal has happened on the continent, is that the vast majority of citizens in the French-speaking countries have seen a rebirth of Pan-Africanism and an ascendance of Pan-African ideology. There was a time where the Pan-Africanists were seen as the delusional people who were painted as believing in things that can never happen, and who were targeted as the enemies of those nations. And Pan-African leaders were arrested, were killed, were jailed. But then the failure of the regimes that were put in power by the French colonial administration and the continuity of exploitation and the deterioration of quality of life in this nation has eventually led people to now see the importance of truly decolonizing our nation, because the decolonization process was halted when our leaders were assassinated and replaced by those puppets. So we are seeing a lot of these leaders being toppled in the vast majority of those French-speaking nations. I will give you a simple example. When you look at Niger, for example, actually 9 out of 10 light bulbs in French are lit up by the uranium that the French have actually created in Niger. But out of the massive exploitation of Niger's uranium, the French government for more than 50 years was only paying 3% to the people of Niger for the uranium they were stealing from their land. And even those 3% were ending up in the pockets of the same puppet leaders they put in power, because they need to maintain those dictators there to be able to have those abusive policies. And those dictators end up even stealing the very little that is given to people. But the consequence is that the exploitation of this uranium has completely destroyed the water of those communities that relied heavily on water for agricultural production and livestock, and it has worsened the conditions of those countries. For a long time, Niger was literally the poorest nation on the planet, when it actually has the most sought after mineral on the planet. And that is the case for many other African nations. So recently, many of those leaders are being toppled. And there were massive protests organized by brilliant Pan-African activists over many of those countries. It took a lot of organizing to get there, and people protesting in those nations and saying they wanted their leaders out. And the army intervened in some of those cases and removed those leaders. That was the case in Guinea, that was the case in Mali, that was the case in Burkina Faso, that was the case in Niger as well. Now, there are some leaders that have realized how high the stakes are and want to do everything absolutely possible to maintain themselves in power. And that is the case of the dictator of Togo, whose father and himself have always played a role in helping the French coordinate the coups and the removal of anti-French leaders in other countries for many decades. But now, because he sees that the stakes are high, the people of Togo absolutely don't want him. The entire region is having a huge anti-French sentiment, and people are even calling for a coup in Togo. Now he is redesigning his policies and revamping himself as a Pan-African leader. So over the past couple of years, specifically past 2 years, he has now all of a sudden become outspoken against what he calls the existing world order. Of course, he never specifically speak against any Western nation. He will not say France did this or the US did that. But then he speaks very vaguely. Well, we need our nations to be strong and independent. We need to make our own policies, because he wants to speak the kind of things that will make the young people fall for it. But people were not falling for that. Now, he went as far as tried as much as possible to get close to the leaders who did the coup in some of those countries by saying, hey, I'm on your side. We need to put an end to this whole nonsense. But at the same time, the policies he's implementing in Togo are still colonial. His regime in his own establishment is colonial. The way they rule the country like a family business is entirely colonial. And now he's organizing what is called the 9th Pan-African Congress, which is actually an insult, because Sylvanus Olympio, the night Sylvanus Olympio was killed, he was drafting the charter of the African Union, because he was among the presidents that were assigned to draft the charter of the African Union. He was killed, and the documents of the drafting was found on his office, which his family has kept till day. And when the African Union was founded, they decided to boycott Eyadema Nyasimbe, who assassinated him for many years. The irony is that the son of the same Eyadema, who when Eyadema died, the French president said, I lose a personal friend and France loses a great ally, is the one that is now organizing the 9th Pan-African Congress. And he is inviting young Pan-Africanists from all over the world, because he wants to now be seen as the champion of Pan-Africanism on the continent. But now there are other things that people don't realize is that last year, the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, after realizing France has completely lost grounds in Africa, they are hated in every single country that they were ever present in today. And the public opinion is completely in their disfavor. They have set up an entire roadmap, which they are calling a reconquest of African nation. And as part of that reconquest of African nation, they included identifying influencers, artists, politicians, and presidents who can help them revamp the image of France and who can help them reconquer the trust of the people of those nations. So the president of Togo is being smart. He wants to be useful on both sides. On one side, giving the French the impression that, you know what, I got you. I'm going to make sure they trust me, and I'm going to get to the point where I can help you stay. And on the other side, telling the young people that, you know what, this colonialism is really bad for us. We need our own systems. We need to get rid of the existing system. And he came with a new term that he's calling the African form of democracy, which is very hilarious because he said that the West.
While we wait for you to reconnect, it sounds like when they used to say African socialism, or when they would say, oh, I hope you can come back. Hold on.
Yeah, I'm back.
Yeah. Okay, good. Or it also reminded me when Kwame Ture used to talk about that Pan Africanism was such a popular idea that even the compradors had to pretend to adopt it because they can't openly speak against it and retain relationship with the people. So, but yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
So when he talks about when he mentioned that the Western form of democracy has failed and we need an African version of democracy, the truth is that his regime assassinated the African version of democracy. It was the people of Togo who chose Olympio, which they killed. The Western form of democracy, he said, has failed. They have never practiced it in the first place. In Togo for 30 years, when his father was president, there was only one single party in the nation. And his father used to organize elections every 5 years, and he was the only candidate in each of those elections. So literally, you can either vote for him or him. There is no other options in the country. One national television, one radio. Everything else was banned. Under his father's rule, we were made to.
We're almost there. We almost made it the hour.
Uniforms whenever they are visiting and sing for them. So what I'm saying is that they are trying to manipulate people's anger against the colonial establishment by now revamping themselves as the solution to the problem that they themselves created. Actually, they did not just create the problem, they are the problem. Their level of corruption, of selfishness, of mismanagement, of embezzling of funds is what led us to this mess in the first place.
So, to what extent do you see this being effective among the youth in Togo in particular? That is, this attempt to redirect the anger. And I've seen you say in other interviews that you are angry and proud of it. And I appreciate that as one who would, I vibe with that sentiment very well. Like that. But to what extent do you see that being successful in quelling or confusing particularly the youth in Togo, and then beyond, because I know you do a lot of work globally and in the diaspora. So to what extent is this taking hold, this false presentation?
One thing that I am very, very reassured about, and I'm so proud of, is that the Togolese youth are not buying this, not at all. In fact, they ridiculed the president on social media, on TikTok. Just last month, they arrested 3 of those young people aged between 16 and 19 because they went online and they called the crap out. They were like, you cannot fool us with these your things. We want a new government. We want a president that we can choose for ourselves. You cannot rule us for 20 years after your father ruled for 40 years and now tell us that you are coming up with a new form of Pan Africanism. So the people are not falling for it. And I am also proud of the key figures of Pan-African resistance in Francophone Africa who called it out as well. People like Kemi Seba, people like Natalie Yam, they called it out and they call the young people to not fall for this nonsense. But the reality is the president of Togo doesn't really care about public perception. He has never cared about it. Can you imagine this guy has been president for 20 years and he has never held a public speaking event, never held a press conference ever in 20 years of him being president. He doesn't speak to us. He has only done 2 interviews his entire 20 years in power, 2 interviews with the media. And those 2 were international media. He has never been interviewed by any Togolese media in the past 20 years, not once, ever. So he does not care about the Togolese public opinion. He does not believe that he's accountable to us. In fact, he does not even feel like he owes us any explanation. What he's trying to do is to buy the support of his masters because he's afraid he's coming to an end of his rule. And he wants to make them think that he has a solution to their problem. And those are the people he's trying to play, not the people of Togo, because he really knows what our position and our stance is. That is why he has banned protests. He has banned several opposition medias, and till today in Togo, speaking anything against them sends you directly to prison. But despite that, people are resisting. They have been resisting for 60 years. And for me, even though we haven't succeeded at removing him from power, the fact that we continue despite the massive brutality of his regime and the violence that we face is a proof that we are very aware of what we want as citizens and as people.
That is, forgive me for being shocked, but that is amazing to me that in 2024, with all of this social media technology, digital, virtual media, post and during a pandemic, that someone would not have even had a virtual press conference with their people. It's the equivalent of doing a YouTube and shutting off the comments because you know you
Right.
know what the response is going to be. That is amazing. So
yeah.
I only have a few minutes left. There's one thing I saw you talk about. Well, there's two things I saw you talk about that one of which we talk about here all the time, which is the role of celebrity. And I saw you get, and I will admit I appreciated it because we don't often see people in your position as a spokesperson for a variety of efforts show this level of what to me is righteous anger. But you expressed a little bit of anger at I believe it was a Nigerian pop star that was invited to perform some years ago. And you were and I forgot the football player's name, but you made reference to, in other words, you were talking about the role of celebrity, Togolese and otherwise, in protecting or criticizing the current regime. Could you say a little bit about how you've seen or update us perhaps since the interview I saw on where celebrity have been in this?
It was specifically Yemi Alade, and I'm going to say her name again, who actually, after my interview, denied ever supporting our president. But then I brought out the video that she made a full clip singing for our president, saying, Togo, 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 who is your king? Who is your boss? Fonya Singbe, he brought lights, he brought this and stuff like that. And she was paid heavily for it. And she was not the first one. There were celebrities from other countries, Congo, Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, that the regime recruits to sing their song and their praises. First of all, I have to say that Togo is a culture, the regime in Togo implemented a culture of self promotion. The president, the current president, his father, when he was president for over 30 years, we had to line up every day from his residency to the presidency to clap for him when he's going to work and clap for him when he's returning from work. It was 4 times a day because he takes his midday break and goes back home, and in the afternoon the same. And on Wednesday afternoons, we don't go to school, we go to rehearsal to rehearse songs and choreographies. And on Sundays, we were at the party headquarters to dance choreographies for him. And all the songs were to praise him about how much we are blessed to have him as a leader, how he's the best leader in Africa, how he's the most thoughtful president that the world knows, and how he's the most powerful president in Africa. And the level of indoctrination was so deep that, mind you, it wasn't until I left Togo that I was having a conversation with some Nigerians, and they asked about the population of Togo and the size of our army. And when I mentioned it, they crack up laughing. They were laughing so hard. And then they said, it means we can conquer Togo in 20 minutes. And I was like, because for a long time, deep inside me, I had the conception that we had the most powerful army on the continent. So because the dictator made sure he made us believe that he was the king of the entire continent, and he was the best leader we could possibly ever had. So that culture has continued, where they have recruited and continue to recruit celebrities to sing their songs and their praise, just to give the impression that the people love them so much, they are appreciated. But people don't buy that. And the good thing is that the vast majority of celebrities in Togo who in the past years have sung for the president get cancelled. Their concert, people don't attend anymore. People call them out, people cancel them. And even when they organize concerts in the diaspora people also show up there and they completely hijack the concert for them. So I'm glad that there's a high level of consciousness there, and people are no longer accepting those leaders manipulating them. So they are now resorting more to using non-Togolese celebrities to do that, to do their self-promotion. But I find it very pathetic for celebrities, because for me, when you live like on a continent of Africa, where you see so much abuse and so much oppression, and the vast majority of the celebrities, whether they are musicians or athletes, the vast majority of them come from extreme poverty. They were lucky to be where they are, and a lot of their success is due to the poor people like themselves supporting them and loving their arts and loving their work. When you have gone through that, it is your moral responsibility to be the voice of the oppressed, not to become the clarion of the oppressor. But for some of them, the titles get over their head, and unfortunately, they don't understand that their duty is not to have a seat at the table of the privileged. Their duty is to actually put an end to privileges altogether. So they see themselves hanging out with presidents, and they think they have made it. But it is not the president that gave them the legitimacy and the love. It is the people that those presidents were abusing. So I find it's very insensitive for them to sell out. The specific celebrity
hold on a second. It's almost.
We were friends for some. Yeah.
I think we missed that very last part. This is an unfortunate. Okay, sorry.
All right.
I think you're back. I think you're back. Sorry.
So what I was saying, that Emmanuel Adebayo was a friend of mine, but the moment that he campaigned for the dictator, I put an end to the friendship. It's not that I don't value friendship, but then for me, my responsibility is towards the people like us who are suffering, the people of Togo that are suffering. I cannot be friends with people who praise and chant the names of those who are abusing our citizens and taking every single little thing from them. It's literally impossible for me, and I think it's a betrayal to the upbringing that I received from my father and the legacy of my grandfather's resistance against those systems in the first place. Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, is it still true that you cannot go home for fear of arrest or imprisonment or worse?
I cannot. The moment I set a foot in Togo, I'm done. I know that. They made it clear. There are people who got arrested and who are still in prison, and they've been in prison for years, no trial. They have never seen a judge. They have never been sentenced. And they did far, far, far less to the government than I did. I was declared a terrorist. So officially, I know for sure that if they ever get a hold of me, I'm done. Yes.
Well, since Ancestry.com told me that I'm 15% Togolese, I will vow, I will vow not to return home until you can go home. So when you go home, I'll go with you. And until then, we'll just have to hold off. But listen, I know you have to run. I am very much going to follow up with you for more conversation. Thank you very much for joining us, and continued good luck with the struggle. Yeah.
Thank you for the solidarity. Have a good
Absolutely. Right on. Take care. Peace. All right, everybody. Big shout out to Farida Nabourema, and we will definitely endeavor to bring her back as soon as possible. And thanks to Dwayne Wong for putting that together, putting us in touch. I am going to respond to a couple questions, and there's a couple of things that I wanted to bring up with her, and we'll do it again at some point. Whenever I can schedule this, but one of the things, just quickly, and then there's a couple of points, and then if you have any comments or questions, just recycle them and I'll address them before wrapping up. But in sort of preparing for today, I went back and I kind of went down started going down one of the rabbit holes around this Bitcoin argument, because Farida does do a lot around Bitcoin. This is not a small part of her work. And in fact, one of the things that she does is convene an annual Africa Bitcoin conference, which, as you can see here, is going to be in Kenya in December of this year. And it's been going on for a couple of years with the idea that Bitcoin can help the African continent. As you see, Farida is a convener and executive director. One of the things that has occurred, though, in the past, in a couple of years ago, she had as a guest to that conference, or the conference invited as one of their speakers, Herman Vivier, who, I'll just pull this up here. This is just sort of gets to one of the points that I would want to make around Bitcoin. And this is in the book where we interviewed the author on EYL a couple of weeks or months ago, Let Them Eat Crypto. And one of the arguments in the book is that because, as I was trying to say briefly in our discussion there with Farida, because the original owners of Bitcoin know that the only way to turn it into a valuable product is to get others involved. They have huge campaigns going on throughout the continent and in Central and South America to try to bring, obviously, more to bring in more investors and to find and to create and increase the value of their already owned asset. Bitcoin dogma is swallowed easiest where inequality is stark and political challenges are most complex. Economically divided cities like in South Africa are growing hotspots for Bitcoin missions. Ikasi is a Bitcoin education center and surf school turned Bitcoin boot camp, which opened its doors in 2021. The project caters for impressionable children in township near Mossel Bay, Cape Town. It was kicked off by a local Bitcoiner, Herman Vivier, with funding from Paxful and the Built with Bitcoin Foundation. All right. Herman Vivier is I can show you here. This guy, co-founder of Unravel Surf Travel, the Surfer Kids nonprofit in Cape Town. bartender, manager, exchange student, volunteer. Let's see, where does Ikasi show up? Anyway, but this is I'll find the other one I had. Where's the other link that I had? But my point is, it's white investors who are involved heavily in the Bitcoin space. Here's a better, who move in and out of, recovering addict, husband and father of 2 boys, South African small business owner, hobbyist, writer, and blogger. Okay. And just a little bit more from the Pax Full, because this is sort of even more to my point here. Just pull this part up here. Ray Youssef, the founder of Paxful and primary sponsor of the missionary projects, was convinced that while traditional Bitcoiner demographic middle-class white men were already sold on the idea that crypto could be a viable moneymaker, there were still plenty of untapped and unbanked punters in Africa that needed convincing of the boomph of hyper Bitcoinization. And punter is just is a British term for like sucker, punk, chump. So with, like every big crypto exchange, Paxful often recruited users, and apparently it's defunct already because Youssef and his partner went into some beef or whatever. But like every big crypto exchange, Paxful often recruited users to its trading platform through its owner's U.S. registered 501c3 nonprofit, the Built with Bitcoin Foundation. Paxful's strategy of using charitable organization to support its profitable hyper-Bitcoinization initiatives was being deployed across Africa by evangelists and exchanges, a house-to-house roundup of young people's savings into a scam. Bitcoin, after all, could never fulfill any of the functions required of a digital money system. According to Stephen Deal, a computer scientist and co-author of Popping the Crypto Bubble, a Bitcoin has no manifestation in the real world, produces nothing, has no assets, income, customers, cash flow, or dividends. The net present value of Bitcoin is zero and can never be non-zero. Its value is purely from a form of recursive speculation, a delusion that more victims will come to speculate in the speculation, thus perpetuating the scam and driving the speculated value higher. It is a futures contract with an underlying bet on human gullibility, a bet that there will be more fools in the future to pay out present fools. So, and as I was pointing out, all of the Bitcoin is what I was reading from, I'll just share here very quickly, is the biggest Bitcoin whales, who owns the most Bitcoin. It tells you that the distribution is approximately 6,900 wallets control 58% of the Bitcoins, which means about 0.01% of the total Bitcoin holders have almost 60% of the supply. So Satoshi Nakamoto, to the extent that this person exists and is still active, has still the most of the Bitcoins, some of which may be, I forgot the word they use, might be basically defunct because they can't be accessed or bought or traded. The Winklevoss twins, Changpeng Zhao, or CZ, the founder of Binance platform, worth roughly 96 billion. Grayscale, which, who was I just reading is wrapped up in Grayscale? But anyway, so the idea that this is a currency issue, and so before, I don't know if they were still there while they were still here trolling me why do you think BRICS was created? BRICS was not just, as far as I'm aware, BRICS is not just an attempt to supplant or to create a new currency, and it certainly wasn't to coalesce colonized or so-called second and third world nations. It wasn't a goal to coalesce. It's not a goal to coalesce them so they can invest in Bitcoin as a pathway to freedom. If anything, they would want to create their own currency based on their own collective governmental organization, arrangement, distribution, value assessing, so on and so forth, to free themselves from the American dollar, which is itself used as imperial, as super imperialism, as Michael Hudson says. So it's not that I'm saying, I'm not arguing in defense of the dollar or the current existing Western dominated currency system. I'm just saying that investing in white owned Western dominated currency systems like Bitcoin and blockchain, the blockchain in general, and the exchanges in particular through which all of this is transferred, that's not the solution. And then, of course, they went on to say that that poor people are poor because of people like me. Well, I mean, that's just absurd and a non-argument. But that gets to that. That's why my fundamental question to Farida and everybody else is: how does Bitcoin handle the issue of lack of distribution and accumulation? So even as she was talking, and she was talking about the value of the anonymity of the coin and the exchange that activists can use, but I wrote, but this does not address how activists accumulate any resources to begin with. So to say that you can transfer funds anonymously and without banks or systems that the government sponsors is one thing, but that doesn't answer the question of how you generate any initial resources to begin with. It also doesn't answer the question of how that Bitcoin that gets transferred becomes spendable, because then you have to transfer it into a currency that you can use in whatever space you're in to buy things. That's why I asked her, what was she actually buying with Bitcoin? Because most services and goods cannot be purchased with Bitcoin. So you can transfer some Bitcoin, but then someone on the other end has to extract that Bitcoin, go to an exchange it for whatever currency, whatever value it is, based on either a US dollar or a franc or a pound, and then go shopping. And as I was going to bring up, this is not answered. Look at the cases throughout the continent, but also in El Salvador where this has not helped. And as I also noted in response to what Farida was saying, poverty is not the result of the value of the currency. People are not poor because they have a bunch of money that's valueless. People are poor because they don't have access to wealth or income at any significant level because of the capitalist and neo-colonial relationships that individuals and businesses have with one another, and the countries have to bigger, more dominant countries. So that's how is it spendable? It's not. And its value is based in, again, even if you go and look at, I get, one of the things I get is I get those daily reports on these stocks are up and down. But Bitcoin, when it's up, it's valued in US dollars. So if Bitcoin is up or down, it's up or down based on its value in US dollars. So I didn't want to become combative in a short period of time, but I would really want to press her on what was actually purchased with Bitcoin, what goods or services were actually purchased with Bitcoin. Exactly. I'm poor because pillows cost $100 for no reason other than greed. That's it. That's right. So yeah, and that's why I said even in my buying power argument, George Jackson is the only luminary I've seen to get this right, where he pointed out that purchasing power is mythology when they can just raise the cost of the products you're buying. So that's the same whether you're buying those products with the US dollar or with Bitcoin. It doesn't change anything about how those products are valued, who ends up with the lion's share of the wealth created through that exchange. It doesn't answer, so. And same here, Jaribu, that her comments around Bretton Woods were confusing because I don't see how I would want to know specifically what she meant by what Bretton Woods arrangements were and how the Bitcoin blockchain world circumvents that. I'm not clear on that either. But that said, having listened to what I do appreciate is that when you listen to the overall context that Farida and others are struggling against in that history, I am, and I don't mean to sound condescending, but I understand why, and that's what the Let Them Eat Crypto book is pointing to. I understand why people in that condition would be in that immediate search for a lifeline, be willing to reach and grab for anything, and even if it isn't the lifeline that it pretends to be. Yeah, so. Right, all currency can be valued in another currency, but that's my point. When you go to assess the value of Bitcoin, people are still doing it based on the US dollar and then determining if it's gone up or down based on its value in US dollars. That's sort of my point. And absent its adoption by government and military decree as a useful medium of exchange, what is the point? Because if you have Bitcoin and want to use it, you have to take it out of your wallet, digitally or otherwise, whatever, transfer it through an exchange, pay a fee, have that converted into dollars and extract those dollars and then go spend those dollars. All of that makes money for the capitalist business industry. It makes money for the actual owners of Bitcoin, whose value goes up based in these same US dollars. And then if they get out in time or at the right time, they cash out and do well, leaving everybody else broke. So again, that's the whole point. And remember, Bretton Woods and everything else, that's why I referenced Michael Hudson, because he keeps everybody, he reminds, but his work reminds us of this. All of this is connected to military defense and conquer and imperial expansion. So there is no currency without empire or an existing political power. There is that's what it's there to support. So for Bitcoin to be something that is of use as currency, it has to be backed by an existing political power that can defend itself militarily. We're not there. We're not. Yes, it's a speculative commodity, exactly. But people are talking about it, in this case, are in Farida and others in the Black Bitcoin conferences I've been to here, in these Black and African spaces, it's not spoken of as a speculative commodity. It's spoken of as a liberatory tool. And that's the problem. So it would be, I mean, I don't remember, again, none of the pre-existing anti-colonial movements, and this is not because they were wrong, none of them were advocating that we support the development of a new currency as a mechanism to political freedom and decolonization. And because they understood that it doesn't. Right, but as far as I understand Jared's argument, BRICS is a result of political power exercised by sovereign nations as more of a chance to displace the U.S. dollar. So it actually sounds the same. You make my point better. You make a portion of my point better than I'm making it. So, and thank you for that, because yes, part of what makes BRICS viable is not just that they are challenging or wanting to challenge the dominance of the U.S. dollar. It's because it's that they are, as already relatively at least, sovereign entities looking to strengthen what could be their own currency or a newly developed currency that they're all sharing in terms of policy, value, acceptance. That's what does it. Black people and colonized people do not have this necessary sovereignty to, on their own, support an existing speculative commodity, turn that into a currency that they can then use to circumvent the poverty that's imposed on them by existing power. That's not so. So I don't deny, we've talked about this before, I don't deny the potential value in specific individual moments where transferring something on the blockchain and anonymously, and that's the other thing, the blockchain is not as anonymous as I think people think. It seems to be accessible increasingly by state entities and other cyber whatever, and because it creates a permanent record, you can but whether it can be used is dependent upon an existing political apparatus that has enough power to say we are accepting this as currency. And few places can do that. So she implied that Bitcoin can't be tracked, but it can. That was my point. Particularly at the point where, and I would need to double check and update this, but particularly at the point where you have to take it out to turn it into something. I mean, being able to transfer one wallet to another wallet anonymously may be one thing, and I don't even think that's as anonymous as people think, but that anonymous transfer doesn't do anything. It doesn't create value. It doesn't buy a service. It doesn't, well, it could pay for a good or a service, but for that receiver of the Bitcoin to turn that into something of value beyond the speculative asset that it may be, and to use it as currency, they would have to take it out and turn it into some kind of currency, at which point I think that's where it's less anonymous. But again, my point is ultimately, I don't see how any of this deals with the issue of accumulation and distribution. So if 0.01% of Bitcoin wallets have 60% of the Bitcoin, even if it's valuable and usable as currency, where then does the overturning of poverty and colonial relations occur? But yes, thank you, Brother Jamil, for wrapping me up, and more to come on Bitcoin. Stay tuned to BLM for sure. All right, everybody, listen, I appreciate you all coming through this morning, and big shout out to Farida as well. And thanks again to Dwayne for putting that together. And please do like, share, subscribe, support us through Patreon in the show description if possible, as we continue to wander through these demonetized wilderness streets. And however else you can support, comment, like, share, all of those things. Subscribe. We definitely continue to subscribe to the channel, still slowly growing. And we definitely appreciate that. And if you're in the DC area, I should share this, right? We should, if you're going to be in the DC area on Saturday the 29th, come on through from 1 to 4 p.m. downtown DC, 1301 Connecticut Avenue on the 29th, Saturday, and hang out with the Remix All-Stars and special guests. and hang out, and maybe even beyond. Who knows what might go on that weekend? Yeah. All right. All right, good people. Peace if you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say. It's been a pleasure, and I will catch you next time here on
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
And what do you sacrifice?
Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, they set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything, 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 everything.